Welcome back. If you are starting a nonprofit, you probably know that forming a board of directors is a required step in the process. But you might also be feeling like there are a lot of phrases or some jargon that you need to learn before you can get a little bit more familiar with how boards work. So in this video, I'm going to share 10 phrases related to the nonprofit board of directors that you may or may not know, but you should definitely become familiar with in order to effectively manage a board of directors. Welcome back. My name is Amber Melanie Smith, and I'm a nonprofit founder and executive director and social impact YouTuber who makes these videos all about starting a nonprofit or social enterprise or socially conscious business and how to make an impact in the world, no matter what your interests or causes may be. I hope that you find this video helpful and useful. Don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. I also have a website, foundertofulltime.com, where I have online courses related to the process of starting a nonprofit and developing a sustainable fundraising plan that you might find useful in your journey yourself. All right, this is going to be a similar video to two others that I've done so far, testing your knowledge on nonprofit phrases and jargon. So let's get in here. Let's test our knowledge on these words and phrases related to the nonprofit board of directors. And just like my other videos, I'd love to hear at the end, how many of these did you know? How many did you get right? Leave in the comments below. All right, phrase number one, or actually it's two phrases compared to each other. It's nonprofit CEO versus the board chair or president. All right, what do you think the difference is? Nonprofit CEO versus the nonprofit's board chair or president. Okay, this is one I get a lot, and here's the difference. The nonprofit's CEO or chief executive officer is usually the highest paid staff position in the organization. This is sometimes also called an executive director. This is the person who is managing the organization and usually reports to the board of directors. Now, the board chair or board president, and sometimes the chair and president titles can be used interchangeably. This is the top unpaid board of directors position. This is the person who is managing and overseeing the board of directors, usually leading board meetings, stuff like that. Now, you can sometimes be the same, like it can be the same person sometimes, but that's pretty rare, and you can't hire yourself as the nonprofit CEO and decide what you're going to be paid. That is the job of the board of directors. So the board would vote whether to hire you as the CEO and what your salary would be. You can't decide or vote on that for yourself because that would be considered a conflict of interest. Okay, phrase number two is executive committee. Executive committee. The executive committee, sometimes called ExCom for short, is a special committee on your board of directors that includes the organization's top elected officers like your president or chair, vice chair or vice president, treasurer, and secretary. Those are some of the common elected officer roles in a board of directors. It can also include the nonprofit's CEO or executive director, because of course, to have great organization follow through and alignment, you've got to have your staff and your board very well aligned and communicating with each other all the time. So it's this committee that can have its own meetings, and based on whatever you would have in your organization's bylaws, can be given certain powers like making decisions, some decisions on behalf of the whole organization, or perhaps even vetting decisions or documents that are up for a board vote and offering their recommendations before the rest of the board gets to vote. Phrase number three is conflict of interest. Let's see if you're paying attention because I did mention this before earlier in this video. Conflict of interest. In short, a conflict of interest is when a member of the organization, so this could be a board member or staff, has some kind of personal interest or personal relationship that could influence them when making decisions for the organization. Conflicts of interest often relate to financial matters for the organization, but it could relate to other things as well. So let's just give a couple of examples. Let's say you and your spouse both serve on a board of directors, and your spouse wants to be hired as the paid executive director of the organization. Now, as that person's spouse, you would not be allowed to vote in favor for that person being hired, nor would they be able to vote for themselves. That would be considered a conflict of interest because your personal relationship would be influencing the decision unfairly. Let's look at another example. Let's say your nonprofit is going to do a website redesign and your brother happens to run a website design company. You can't just automatically hire your brother to redesign your website. You've got to vet a couple of vendors, and your brother has to be the one that is offering the objectively most fair price. Choosing your brother to be the vendor using the organization's money would be considered a conflict of interest. Unless, of course, you have, as an organization, done your due diligence and looked at multiple vendors, and your brother's website design company truly is the best fit and offering the best deal for your cause. Every nonprofit needs a written conflict of interest policy that is developed and signed off on by your board of directors. Phrase number 4 is another comparison, and in this one we're going to look at a working board of directors versus a governing board of directors. Working board versus governing board. Now here's the thing, a board of directors for a nonprofit can look a lot of different ways, but in general there are 2 different kinds of formats for a board. A working board is when your board of directors is almost like a stand-in for your organization staff, perhaps because you're a startup and you don't have any staff yet. So your board of directors is actually partially responsible or possibly completely responsible for doing the day-to-day work of running the organization. Things like running your programs, making sure your facilities are have their electricity turned on, if you even have facilities. Things like taking care of your accounting or finding the accounting firm who can do your accounting and bookkeeping for you. On the other hand, a governing board has usually little or possibly even no hands-on day-to-day involvement in running the organization on the ground itself. Instead, this governing board is involved more in higher level decisions like developing policies for the organization, voting on the budget, strategic planning, that kind of thing. And in this case, the governing board is doing all that in partnership with the organization's full-time staff. So how do you know which one you need or which one you are? The general rule of thumb is that newer startup organizations who might not have the finances to pay for full-time staff are more likely to have a working board because someone's got to be on the ground doing all the things it takes to make the organization run. As the organization grows and its budget grows and it starts to hire full-time staff to take care of those day-to-day operations, the board might evolve into more of a governing board, which is focused on those higher level decisions and developing policy for the organization, leaving the full-time staff to handle the day-to-day. Phrase number 5 is consent agenda. Consent agenda. Okay, so a consent agenda is when during a board meeting you have a few topics or items that are going to be bundled together that the board can vote kind of quickly on. This is usually reserved for non-controversial items that the board doesn't feel a need to really discuss in depth or have any kind of debate over. But in order for this to work, you really have to have the board be able to read any materials related to the things that are going to be voted on in advance and have any time to issue comments, perhaps over email if your bylaws allow that, in advance to make the vote during the actual board meeting much more fast. Let's say, for example, your organization needs 3 new policies and they're all kind of boring and non-controversial, you don't expect there to be a lot of conversation about them, you could propose that all 3 be voted on together, but make sure that your board members are provided with the full text of the policy far in advance, giving them a chance to read it and make any comments beforehand. Phrase number 6 is income statement. An income statement is basically a financial report that summarizes the organization's revenue and expenses for a given period of time. It is the board of directors' responsibility to be reviewing and knowledgeable about the organization's financial status at regular intervals. And a lot of times board of directors will do this each month or each quarter. They'll look at the financial statement, the income statement. The income statement is often prepared by a board's treasurer, perhaps with the help of accounting software like QuickBooks, or if you actually have hired an accountant to support your organization, they can help prepare that as well. But it's reviewed by the board treasurer, who is, by definition, sort of the spokesperson on reporting this to the board. If your organization has paid staff, it might also be prepared by that staff, but still reviewed by the treasurer. Phrase number 7 is self-dealing. Now, self-dealing is somewhat related to the conflict of interest that we discussed before, because basically what it is when a nonprofit conducts financial transactions that pay excessive benefits to a party related to the organization. So to one of its staff, to board members, or a family member of a board member, or the business owned by a board member, stuff like that. So this isn't to say that staff can't be paid a reasonable salary. That's not what this is at all. They should definitely be paid a reasonable and market competitive salary to attract and retain talent. This is more about when it feels like the nonprofit is being inappropriately used to funnel money into private interests. Another example I could think of is, let's say there's a foundation and there's a company, and it's like the company's foundation, right? So let's just think of some major company that has a foundation. Best Buy. Best Buy is a company, but they also have the Best Buy Foundation, which is connected to the Best Buy brand. Now, the Best Buy Foundation is a nonprofit. They're not supposed to be using their programs, their grant making, their marketing. They're not supposed to be using it in a way that would funnel money or cause Best Buy, the company, to receive money. So just something to consider if you're thinking of starting a nonprofit that also has like a business arm, or vice versa. Self-dealing is not something that's allowed by the IRS. Phrase number 8 is fiduciary duties. Fiduciary duties. Fiduciary duties is when board members have fiduciary duties, and that means it's their legal responsibility to act in the best interest of the nonprofit that they serve. So it's almost like you're taking a sacred oath to do your best by the organization when you become a board member. These could include doing your due diligence to review policies and finances for the organization. It could mean that you are partially responsible for making sure that the organization is being good stewards of its donations, so it's spending its money effectively to the best of its ability to achieve its charitable mission. It could be being a good spokesperson for the organization, being a good ambassador for the organization. So whenever you're recruiting board members, make sure that they are aware of their fiduciary duties. Phrase number 9 is term limits. Now, term limits is the number of consecutive or back-to-back terms that a person can serve on your board of directors. Let's say your bylaws state that a person's board term is 2 years. And then after that 2 years is up, they are reelected by the rest of the board members for another 2-year term. So term limits would say this person can't serve more than 3 consecutive terms in a row. Once they hit that third consecutive term, which means in this example, they'd be serving on the board for 6 years, they can't be reelected anymore. Just like term limits in, national or local or statewide elections, same kind of concept. Now, your bylaws as an organization are going to dictate what your organization's term limits are. So you get to decide what they are. You could say that there are no term limits. You could say that you can only serve one term as a board of directors member. It's really up to you. But it is a best practice to have term limits and make sure that new people are being included in the board leadership from time to time so you get fresh ideas and bring in more social connections to support your work. The 10th and final phrase we'll discuss today is executive session. Executive session. An executive session, which is sometimes called a closed meeting, is a meeting on the board agenda or a part of a board agenda, a part of a board meeting on the agenda, where only the voting board members could be present. Now, this might be different from a typical board meeting because oftentimes in nonprofit board meetings, you would also have the organization's staff present or other key advisors who are there to help move the organization forward. Now, these sessions are usually reserved for private or very sensitive matters, such as, let's say, the nonprofit CEO or executive director's salary for the next year. Maybe they want to discuss what it should be and take a vote on it. That's not something you can discuss with the executive director present because, again, that's a conflict of interest. So that might be one example. Legal matters might be one example. But I really advise that these be rare and that you include your staff in collaborating with the board as often as possible to make sure that you are keeping transparent lines of communication open and that you have really good alignment between what staff is working on and the board. I'd love to hear how you did. How many of the 10 did you already know or did you guess correctly? Leave that in the comments below. I felt like of the handful of videos I've done defining some of these nonprofit phrases, this is probably the most jargony. A lot of these phrases feel very legal in nature to me. And if you're not already part of the nonprofit world, I can see how they'd be unclear or some of the most confusing out there. As I mentioned before, if you're starting a nonprofit, check out my website, foundertofulltime.com, where I have some online courses guiding you through the process and guiding you through the process of creating a sustainable fundraising plan. Very important for getting your organization started on the right foot. I also have a newsletter for nonprofit leaders and changemakers. The link to subscribe to that is below the video. And finally, I have a Facebook group called Change the World or Bust. We have thousands of people in there from around the world, all sharing how we are making an impact and supporting each other. So come and join us there too. Once again, my name is Amber Melanie Smith. I hope that this was useful and helpful to you on your journey of making an impact. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you next time. Bye.